Yesterday, TV presenter and campaigner Chris Packham, he spoke at a press conference after the sentencing outside Southwark Crown Court on Thursday.
I stand here because I believe this represents the direct theft of our freedom, the destruction of our democracy, the deliberate and calculated intimidation of protesters, and that unless we resist this, the very real danger is that our species will destroy life on Earth.
So, Chris Packham, obviously with very strong views. I'm going to talk first, if I may, to Professor Andrew Tettenbaum. He wrote a really interesting piece in The Spectator magazine. "Just Stop Oil Fanatics Deserve Their Lengthy Jail Terms" was the headline. Good morning to you, Professor.
Good morning.
Good morning. Even if I was to agree with that headline, what do you think water company bosses that got massive pay rises after illegally dumping sewage in our rivers, what kind of punishment should they get?
You've got me there. I think you're right. It's absolutely scandalous the way that water company bosses are profiting from this. Whether you can draw much of a parallel between them and Just Stop Oil, I'm not sure. But I'm entirely with you that there is something very wrong with a water company boss trousering, as you put it, about 800,000 quid for doing a lousy job.
Well, you see, this is when I then get drawn into the fossil fuels argument. I'm not evangelical in any shape or form, but I see the science and I can see the problems caused by them. And it would appear willfully negligent to extend and produce further fossil fuel licences if indeed it ends up suffocating and harming the planet. That is, as to my mind, as big a concern as dumping poop in our rivers.
Oh, well, that may or may not be right, but the issue that arose yesterday was what ought to happen to the people who deliberately blocked the M25. And I think that the real trouble is that there's a lot of misinformation going on here.
Go on.
These guys weren't punished for telling the truth. They're free to tell the truth to their heart's content. They weren't punished for peaceful protest. The thing is, there's more to peaceful protest than simply not hurting people. What they were punished for was quite deliberately inconveniencing nearly 1 million people with a view, in a way, to forcing their views on the rest of us. Now, the thing is, in a democracy, if you want to get your point of view to prevail, you go persuade some voters. The point about the right of peaceful protest is you persuade, you don't coerce. These guys essentially said, we are going to stop you going about your daily business, even if you don't want to listen to us. That's not acceptable.
I take the point. I think, and this is why I'm going to sound paranoid, that you can also see within the world of business and its relationship with government, there is a coziness that goes on. I think that when we look back over the energy crisis triggered by the Ukraine war, the decision that our government made was one that benefited the energy industry far better than it benefited the ordinary man or woman in the street, whose bills went up by more than 350%. And I guess that what I'm doing with the water is I'm trying to demonstrate that there is clearly a systemic con going on within industry where people are rewarded with ridiculously high salaries for illegally, that they're breaking the law, just as Just Stop Oil activists, for breaking the law by illegally dumping sewage. Nothing happens to them. They get more pay. And then we get people that are highlighting the dangers of a fossil fuel industry, which seems to be very cosy with our government, and we lock them away for longer than sex abusers.
Yeah, but we're not locking them away for highlighting the dangers. They can highlight the dangers as much as they like. We are locking them away for behaving not so much like democratic protesters as bullies. They are people who are saying, we are going to foist our views on you, whether you want to listen to us or not. That's not the way we do things in a democracy.
I get that point, but at the same time, none of the water company bosses are being held to account, and they are breaking the law, filling our rivers with sewage, and no action is taken anything against them.
I wouldn't mind those guys being held to account.
Okay.
I don't go to defend them at all.
No, and I appreciate that, Andrew. It just begs the question that why we as a society seem to be quite keen to lock people up with the longest sentences in modern history for airing their views or for causing inconvenience in order to air their views about fossil fuels, whilst we actually increase the pay of the bosses of the water companies that are actually illegally dumping sewage in our rivers. I just don't understand, Andrew, how we as a country can call that justice.
Well, I see what you mean about that. The trouble is there's far too cosy a relationship between government and others and senior bosses in all sorts of industries. That I'm entirely with you on. All I'm getting at is I'm not sure how much of a parallel you can draw between that and the sentences that went to Roger Hallam and his friends. But I'm very much in favour of cutting this close contact between government and people in charge of industry, the quangocrats and others.
I find that most heartening. Always enjoy our conversations. Professor Andrew Tettenborn there. And listening to that was Addie Swarbrick, spokesperson from Just Stop Oil. Good morning to you, Addie. Can you, I know people may think I'm obsessed with water. It's because I spend a lot of my time in it and as a fly fisherman and a campaigner, and I see the very worst. I see the very worst of the criminal behaviour of our water companies flowing past on a weekly basis. And I don't understand why they're getting bigger pay rises. They cut their bonuses because they care. They cut their bonuses, but then they sell their shares and they make. And I don't understand why they're not in prison and your mates are. And I'm maybe you can help explain why your lot are in prison and the water company bosses aren't.
Morning, Matthew. Thank you so much for having me on. So I really hear a lot of what you are saying. I'm a wild swimmer, so I love being in the water, and I just have to ignore the fact that I'm swimming in poo. It's awful, and it's just got worse, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Surface sewage have been around since before I was born, and year on year we're dumping more sewage into the water, as you say, while they make more profits and send more bonuses out. It's atrocious, and we should be locking up these real criminals. The River Wye is going to be dead soon. It's either dead already, it's going to be dead in a few years. And all the people that rely on that tourism in that area, what are they going to do when their river stinks and nobody wants to go there?
They get cheap chicken. So I suppose that's the trade-off. I was very interested in Andrew Tettenborn. He may have a very strong view on Just Stop Oil protesters and the jail sentences, but I thought it was most interesting that he felt, to my ears, just as impassioned about the wrongdoing of water company bosses and just as mystified as me as to why none of them are in prison. Is it because the relationship between government and business is closer, perhaps, than government and the people?
Absolutely. We don't live in a functioning democracy. We live with a government which is lobbied by business. Money talks. If you have money, you can pay to get your way. And that is what we're seeing. And people who are fighting for right to life, right? This is what the people were sent to prison for. They were fighting for their children to have a future. But Cressy's 22, right? 22, and she's been sent to prison for 4 years. She's doing this because she is terrified for her future.
She did. The group inconvenienced her. On Sheila Fogarty yesterday, she read out a long list of the things that were read out in court that were disrupted that day. Interestingly, I would guess that 10,000 times more disruption has occurred over the last 24 hours with a computer software glitch, which will result in no one being sent to prison and no fines.
Exactly. And I think the uncomfortable truth that we need to connect with is that us in the West here are big emitters of of greenhouse gases and global emissions. And that is disrupting people in the global South right now. Last year, 20,000 people died in a flood in Libya, which was made much worse by global warming. So we need to connect with that truth, that this disruption that we see in this country with protest, it is regrettable that it is necessary, but it is essential because the disruption in the global South is It's incomprehensible. People are dying, people are suffering because of our lifestyles. And we are the fifth richest country, and we are the fifth biggest historical emitter, and we have a responsibility.
But forgive me if I make his time is short. I want to get one more question. And the judge said, acknowledging that his sentences were so punitive, that they would be a deterrent. And yet the Telegraph today carries reports that the police believe there will be more protests as a direct result of these sentences. Is that something that you envisage too?
Yeah, I mean, how can you deter people from believing in the science? That's just not something that works. You can't, if you send someone to jail, they're not going to stop believing in gravity, are they? No. But like, you can't deter people from believing in the science. You can't deter people from being terrified for their future, for their family's future. People will continue. People will continue because it's essential. What else can we do?
Lovely talking to you. Thank you for not grandstanding, because I know sometimes Just Stop Oil people do grandstand. And I suppose I want to appeal now to any of you that may have been listening to LBC yesterday afternoon that may have felt, I think these people, they should be locked up in jail. I'd have locked them up for longer. And I'm not going to say you're wrong. What I'm interested in hearing is, in a world of comparisons and relativity, whether we feel that what they did is better, worse or equal to the willful poisoning of our waterways by people who pay themselves ever greater salaries. 0345 6060 973, the number for your thoughts. Miles is on the line in Croydon. Morning, Miles.
Morning, Matthew. How are you?
I'm
pleased to hear you're on the line because obviously following your medical challenges this week, I'm glad you're feeling a bit better.
Okay. Just very briefly, thank you for your kind words. Have we got these prison sentences right or wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't shocked at the sentences, but it's hugely disappointing, and it's quite frightening to think our country is at that stage where we're locking up peaceful protesters that are
disruptive protesters.
Disruptive protesters that are not doing anything for financial gain. Let's remember that.
Yeah, good point.
When we compare them to significant impacts that corporates have behind the scenes in influencing how we tackle real issues in our...
Do you know what, Miles? If I may, I think the point that they weren't doing it for profit, I should have made that clear. Thank you for doing my job for me, Miles. Thank you. Let's waste no more time. We've got lots of people on the phones. Harriet's calling from Tunbridge Wells in Kent. Morning, Harriet.
Oh, morning, Matthew. I must say, I don't normally listen to your programme. I'm not normally listening to LBC at this time.
You're asleep like any normal person, hopefully.
It's quite unusual, but I've been refraining from ringing in over this issue that you've been talking about regarding prison sentences. I've been listening intensely the last 3 days, and I've been wanting to kind of come to a reasoned judgment before sort of piling on in there. But the more I think about it, I actually find it really disturbing. And I think you highlighted it brilliantly when you pointed out the disparity between what the sentence they've been handed and what could have been handed to the corporate bosses.
Who are breaking the law, taking
Absolutely.
and profiting, so they're taking our money and breaking the law.
I know, but I do think that's the root of most bad problems in modern society, is we live in a corporate anarchy, a corporatocracy, rather than a genuinely capitalist society. It's a corporate anarchy.
Does that justify... No, that's the wrong word. Does that lead to the Just Stop Oils? Is that what creates it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have issues with them, but this is not the right way to do it. I mean, these are people doing civil disobedience, and they feel that they've got no other way to highlight the issue that they believe in, regardless of what my thoughts. That's irrelevant. And I don't think handing a 5-year prison. I mean, if I'd been the judge, I would have said, this is the sentence I'd give you. You have to go away collectively and write a pamphlet or a book outlining more ingenious ways of and put that out.
It's
to people
£50,000. £50,000 a year of our money to keep each one of those people in prison, where they will not change their ideology, their mindset.
No,
so why don't we get them doing something, I don't know, like going out and cleaning the poo out of rivers that our water company bosses have put in there, and at least do something helpful to society and good for the environment.
Exactly. No, thank you for dealing with this. I mean, you strike me as like like a political dissident, presenter, broadcaster, journalist. And
I don't know what I am. I don't know what I am, Harriet.
It's good. It's good to hear you asking the questions that you're asking of people, because there's this particularly has worried me. I mean, I've heard other callers ring in and say that I've heard people ring in over the last 3 days say they're really scared about if political dissidents are starting to get locked up in prison with sentences as hefty as this. That's kind of worrying.
Yeah. For me, the thing that worries me more is that we have corporate criminality going on, and it goes completely unpunished, and indeed the culprits get rewarded with more money. And anybody who cares about justice, I don't care, if it was you that was stopped in an ambulance by Just Stop Oil, you have to acknowledge that people doing a protest because of something they care about is different from someone taking your money to commit a crime and getting away with it, in my opinion. Harriet, lovely talking to you. Whether you agree or not with a bunch of Just Stop Oil activists being sent to prison at your expense for a maximum of 5 years, £50,000 per year per prisoner. If you think that's a good idea, I'd love to know what you think should happen to water company bosses who are also breaking the law and paying themselves ever more for the privilege. Steve's picked up the phone, calling from Blackpool. Good morning to you, Steve.
Good morning. I agree with the Just Stop Oil protesters being prisoned.
What benefit to society are we going to get from locking them up?
Well, so they're not being locked up because they're spreading the message. That's fine. If they were being locked up for spreading the message, then that is wrong. But they're being locked up for what they plan to do.
But what advantage? What do we get? What do we get? What do you, Steve, and me, Matthew, get for 50 grand per person per year? What benefit will we receive?
Well, I think the judge summed it up, really, that they'd moved from being eco-activists.
Please, Steve, let's just. I didn't ask what the judge said. I just asked what benefit you are going to get from having them locked up at £50,000 per person per year. Is there not perhaps a better way we could punish them that's not as expensive?
There probably is a better way of punishing them, but that's the issue with the law. And the law is
it's with the judge. The judge decides the sentence. He could have not sent them down. He could have sent them on a community punishment and got them working for us for free.
He could have done, but that's not the point I wanted to make. Okay, the point I wanted to make was the fact that, yes, I agree that there is a massive disparity between the people running the water companies and the Just Stop Oil protesters. I agree with Just Stop Oil protesters being sent to prison. You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Simple as that.
And water company bosses?
They should be jailed, most definitely. And there needs to be a new law enforced that says if you run a company that's a public company, and if you run it not for the public interest, then more for the corporate interest, then that should be a criminal offence. And the reason why they're not doing that is because these people are part of the Westminster bubble.
Right. Which isn't that? But isn't that, Steve? Isn't that within what you said, which I agree with? Isn't that kind of why we end up with Just Stop Oil? Because if we didn't have Just Stop Oil, all you would have is a corporate bubble filled with the bosses of Esso, Shell, BP, etc., doing whatever they like, getting, for example, the poorest people in the land to pay 350% more for their energy bill, while the energy companies roll in the billions of pounds, right? That's the corporate world. That's why Just Stop Oil ends up coming into being, doesn't it? Fighting that.
I agree with you, and I'm not saying that I disagree with what Just Stop Oil want to do. I disagree with their methods in which the way they did it. I don't disagree with what they're saying. I disagree with how they did it. But I think more emphasis needs to be put on people like yourself, journalists, the news. And what we get fed through the news is so
rubbish.
It's skewed in one way, in a particular way. We're not being given all the facts from both sides. It's very difficult to find an unbiased news.
Is it relevant, Steve? Is it relevant that in the court case for Just Stop Oil that the judge decided to ban a world-leading scientific authority on climate change from the hearing? If you're having a discussion, wouldn't you want to hear all the facts rather than just limit the courtroom facts to ones that you as a judge prefer? That's not really justice. That's self-selecting justice.
It is self-selecting justice. I agree with you on that. And that would lead towards mitigation of the offences that they've been accused of, which would then lead to, if they can try and mitigate, this is why we did it, so on and so forth. But I'm not a lawyer. I'm not the judge. I didn't sit through all the evidence.
Can I ask you?
I can't say 100%.
No. Can I ask you just one bit more before, because I think we have more in common than we might think, Steve. If you were the judge and you had the water company boss Skellets that I mentioned, who ended up with nearly £1 million after chucking sewage in the rivers of his water company, Wessex Water, do you think he should do more or less time in prison than a Just Stop Oil protester? The Just Stop Oil protester has made no profit. He's making money out of his crime. Alleged crime, in case the lawyers are listening.
He should serve significantly more time because he's doing it willfully and deliberately and knowing what he's doing.
Steve, if I could lift up my arm and give you a cuddle right now, I would. Spot on, my friend. I think that's exactly the right answer. That the profit element it has a part to play. Thank you. 0345 6060 973, the number. You may disagree. I'm glad that Steve and I see eye to eye. Let's talk about Just Stop Oil and water company bosses and who is more deserving of a taxpayer-funded break at His Majesty's pleasure. Joe's picked up the line in Hertfordshire. Morning, Joe.
Good morning.
Morning. Who should be in prison and for how long?
I could, like, for example, I spoke to your, I believe, the person before the phone call. I completely agree with the prison sentences that they received. Okay. Personally, I say good riddance to bad rubbish. We've endured years and years of the Just Oil protest.
How many times, out of interest, have you personally been inconvenienced over the years?
Personally, I've been inconvenienced once.
Once, okay.
So traffic for about a period of 2 hours.
Okay, and have you ever been stuck in traffic for longer than that due to poor driving or breakdown in road communications and such like? I was stuck on a motorway the other day for about 2 hours, no idea why. No one sent to prison, no one held responsible. Just part of life. Yesterday, computers go down all around the world. No one's going to be sent to prison. Massive inconvenience.
Yeah, that's true.
But this lot, you're happy to pay 50 grand a year to lock them up, even though it won't change their mindset, it won't change their ideology.
Yes, I'll be happy to, because hopefully it will set a precedent for future Just Oil protesters.
And, okay, so the police are saying that as a result of the punitive sentences, they're expecting more protests, not fewer.
Okay, but for myself, I would assume that would set a precedent for the Just Oil protesters to at least change the modus operandi of how they protest, because the way they protest is they alienate the public. Most of the people who I speak to are vehemently against the modus operandi, not against the cause.
Do you remember in April last year when they ringed Parliament? Do you remember that?
I remember, I heard of that,
Yeah, so that got no column inches in the newspapers at all. So the message wasn't spread at all. Non-violent, totally non-disruptive, all the traffic functioned fine, no message received. That would suggest to me, Joe, that if you want your message received, you have to do something about it. But now let's talk, if you'll forgive me, about water company bosses who not only are breaking the law, they're actually doing it with our money. They're paying themselves, so they're taking our money to enrich themselves while breaking the law. And none of them are in prison or even facing the possibility of going to prison.
Yes.
Where is the justice in that, Joe?
Well, the justice is not there because, well, for example, who pays the piper dictates the tune. Money is a silent currency that speaks volumes.
And yet you, Joe, are siding with the state, the money, in locking up 5 individuals at huge expense to the taxpayer that will achieve nothing.
Possibly. Well, it depends.
Why don't we get them cleaning up litter? At least do something productive. If the mindset is one that they are evangelical about climate change, they're not going to change their opinion in prison. So we might as well get them to do something useful instead of spending 50 grand a year locking them up. Maybe we could get them to run a water company.
Perhaps their job.
How hard can it be?
I understand, but it's just, like, for example, hopefully says the president that they can change the... for example, I understand what you just said, that they made a telephone to Parliament and they had no coverage whatsoever. Yeah. But perhaps about just peaceful protest, not disruptive protest, there leave people stranded, ambulances in traffic. That's just...
I totally agree. I totally agree. But I can't ignore the fact there's that bloke Kettles I mentioned, who's on nearly £1 million a year dumping sewage in our rivers, and we pay his salary. And I don't know about you, Joe, but I would much rather he was in prison than some of the Just Stop Oil people. Lovely talking to you. Martin's waiting to speak to us. He's in Margate. Morning, Martin.
Morning, Matt. Thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I just wanted to say that it is actually possible to make prison a remotely positive experience, I did. I got 18 months and did 6. It felt like 2 years, and I really feel sorry for the guy, because the 3 years out of 5 that he's going to have to do will feel like the best part of a decade. But the most important thing is that you get down to the gym. If you don't go down to the gym for an hour a day, you won't be craving carbs, you can't eat the food, which is disgusting. If you don't go down to the gym today and rip it, you won't feel like you've been in a fight with Mike Tyson for 3 rounds. At the end of the day, you won't be able to sleep on the bed. And if you can't eat and can't sleep, that is what will do you in the jail. Oh. I made friends in prison that I consider brothers now that would kill or die for me, and so it is possible to make it a positive experience. I just hope so much that...
Do you think it would be a more positive experience if we had a broader reflection of society in prison? And I don't want to keep harping on, but start locking up a few water company bosses, mainly middle-class people who have been earning nearly the best part of £1 million a year, putting poo in our rivers. Should prison? Do you think prison would benefit from maybe more middle-class offenders being locked up?
Well, it's ironic that you say that because I know a couple of JSO protesters. They're staunchly middle class, and they are fuming. And from what I understand, they're saying they are now looking to flood the prison system. I think that in sometime over the next week, starting next week, you are going to see thousands of JSO protesters willingly walking out into the road. I'm an HGV driver, by the way. They, with their eyes wide open, expecting jail, expecting to flood the prison system. This is what a couple of JSO protesters I know are talking about.
I have to say, it's what the police are saying, not flooding the prisons, but they do expect many more protests as a result. Martin, lovely talking to you. Vanessa, let's have a quick word with you in Crawley. Morning, Vanessa.
Morning, hello.
Morning, hello.
All right, I just want to say about these Just Stop Oil protesters.
Not the water company bosses.
Well, they are just...
It's interesting which ones we choose, isn't it? The ones that aren't profiting from their crimes, as opposed to the ones that are.
Yeah, literally stick them all in the same category, because they're all just as bad as each other. So you've got the Just Stop Oil protesters. They were blocking ambulances, fire crew. They were causing so much, chaos. Mm-hmm. And there has to be a consequence in the community.
In the water company, South West Water poisoned 18,000 homes. Yeah. And they gave out 100 and something quid as compensation, and the boss ends up with a pay packet. She forgo her bonus, but still ends up thanks to a share sale of nearly £1 million. How? I'll be honest. I understand why you're upset about Just Stop Oil stopping ambulances. I get that 110%. Yeah. But Vanessa,
and the fact that
I am furious about the fact that water company bosses, because they wear nice ties and suits, seem to be getting away with criminality, and we're all diverted. Looking at the hippies fighting about saving the planet. Aren't they? Lock them up, 5 years, lock them up. Not a word on the water company.
Well, maybe there needs to be a new investigation by the government and literally nail these people. Nail them, get them.
All right.
And literally... it's about the community. It's about
It is.
And an example.
And if I may say so, Vanessa, what's really interesting is every single person that's come on to talk about why they're happy about Just Stop Oil protesters being locked up has also admitted they'd also be very happy to see water company bosses locked up as well. And that makes me feel that it was worth getting up this morning. So, Vanessa, thank you.